My name is Stephen Upton, and this film is part 3 of a 3-part series where we examine the Messines mines. Whilst mining took place all along the Western Front, we're only going to be examining the mines that were detonated on the 7th of June 1917. If you look at this map towards the bottom, you've got the town of Messines, and you can see that the front line curves around Messines, White Sheet and St Eloi there, and then joins onto the infamous Ypres salient. The object of the British armies on the 7th of June was to eliminate that southern bulge, to basically cut it off and capture the Messines ridge. We're going to take a look at the St Eloi crater first. There was quite a lot of mining done in this village, and our takeoff point, as you can see there, is directly between two craters. The one on the right was actually created in 1916, and it's the one on the left that we're interested in. That's the one from June 1917. Looking now at a trench map, the red being the German trenches, you can see my takeoff point indicated now is directly over the German front line. And you can actually, those little star-like features show various craters, and there's quite a large number. As far as I'm aware though, only 3 of them still exist. The crater that you see immediately before the camera now was created a year before those in question. This is the 1916 crater. And I have to thank the family that actually owns this land and the house I'm going to be flying over in a moment. They not only kindly gave me permission, but he also told me a story that when he was digging the foundations for the house, that the house which you can just see indicated there at the bottom left, as they were digging down, he came across the original German frontline trenches. So we know precisely where they are. They're directly under that house. And when you look at the German trench map that we showed earlier, it corresponds quite precisely with these craters, the house, so we know exactly where we are in relationship to what took place here in 1916-17. There is another crater, he told me, in those woods, although even though I flew over it, I couldn't see the crater itself through the dense foliage. But we're now swinging round and looking towards Ypres there, which is indicated in the distance. This gives us a wonderful view of the surrounding area, and looking down upon the modern day village of St Eloi. Right across here, this was no man's land, and there were several dozen minor craters. But the actual 1917 crater now is just in view at the top of our camera there, top of our screen. Just going to indicate it now. That's our 1917 crater. I read an account by a Canadian soldier who was involved in attacks in this area, and in particular capturing these craters. And he gives a very graphic display of a terrible 3 or 4 day period where his unit managed to capture the craters, but they were cut off. The Germans counterattacked, and it went backwards and forwards. So this particular land here that we're flying over was very heavily fought for. Both the Germans, Canadians and British forces attacking and counterattacking, and it exchanged hands probably dozens of times. We're now directly over the 1917 crater, and it gives you an idea of the size of it. When you look at the houses nearby, you could drop at least 4 or 5 of those houses into it. As we pan up now, in the distance we can see Mount Kemmel, and also see where that marker is now. That is the bottom of a very shallow valley. That's the British front line. The Germans over to the left and coming around to directly under our camera. Swinging round to the south, you've got Messines, then White Sheets, and over to the right where the other craters are, which were featured in part 2 of this series. All of this land was totally devastated during 1917. It was a brown crater field. In most places, the Germans occupied the high ground and the British the low ground. But in that shallow valley that we showed earlier, because of the water table, it was virtually impossible to dig trenches that were deep enough to protect the soldiers. So what they did, they built breastworks. That's using sandbags to create a wall in front of sometimes what was very shallow trenches. Very good view now of the 16 crater on the left and the 17 crater on the right. There is a bit of a gap in the trees to the left of the 16 crater, which is where I thought there was another crater, but in flying over it I saw nothing in there. It's somewhere hidden under those trees on the left. Now, this is a fantastic view towards Ypres. The Ypres, there's Ypres there now marked, and that marker is the Ypres-Camins Canal. And you can see it comes round and bends in front of us there and runs along to the right. Where that canal cut across the British front line into the German front line, there's a lot of fighting took place. Panning round, we're looking at, by 1918, again would have been just a complete crater field. But our next craters we're going to look at, which is at Hill 60, is indicated there. When you read about the Ypres salient, it always talks about the Germans occupying the high ground. Like, where is it? Stand on the ground and you can't see any high ground. But indicated right there, you can actually see a gentle roll in the land. That's the high ground they refer to. We're now going to relocate to the infamous Hill 60. Hill 60 isn't actually a natural hill. It's a spoil heap created when the railway cutting was put in. This was a very important point for the Germans to keep hold of, because from this high ground they could see most of the Ypres salient spread out around them. There's a lot of tunnelling operations took place here, lots of attacks and counterattacks. And as we take off now, you can see right in the middle of our picture there a memorial. There is a memorial here, and I believe that's the one to the Canadian Tunnelling Company. But we're now looking directly down on the Hill 60 crater. This is the main crater from 1917. There were lots of other craters around here, but this is the one dry crater that we see featured in all of these Messines crater films. But that's the dead centre of the crater. Doesn't look terribly impressive from the air, actually. As we just pan up now, you can see the railway line, that's the cutting, and of course Hill 60 is the spoil heap from that. You can now see on the far side of the railway the caterpillar, and that's the caterpillar crater indicated there. So both the caterpillar and the main Hill 60 craters were two of the explosions created during the 1917 June attack. Hill 60 was created by firing some 53,500 pounds of high explosives, and the caterpillar actually 70,000 pounds. The St. Eli crater, although it actually doesn't look quite as big, 95,000 pounds of high explosives. But the explosives here were some 30 metres below ground when they were detonated. It was intended to be some 25 or 26 mines right the way round this Messines salient. But some of them were abandoned, some were discovered by the Germans and flooded. One of them actually didn't detonate on the day, but it went off in 1951. Somebody had put an electricity pylon directly above it, and it was struck by lightning. But 19 of these huge mines all went up more or less simultaneously. Here's a great view now towards Zilbeck, and in the distance Ypres. Being indicated now is Larchwood cemetery, sometimes known as Railway Cutting Cemetery. You can see that little triangle of water, that was known as the Bund by many soldiers. And all of this land was heavily fought over. From Hill 60, you actually get an incredible view right across the salient. That's why it was important for German artillery observers. And of course, this railway that we're seeing now, that couldn't have taken place back in 1917. But looking straight down on it now, this was one of the most hotly contested pieces of land anywhere to be found on the Western Front. As this film comes to an end now, I'd like to thank you for watching and ask you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Finally, I dedicate this film to the memory of all those who served in the Australian Tunnelling Company, many of whom still lie in the ground beneath Hill 60. We shall never forget.